On the 9th of June, far-right parties made striking gains in European Union elections, delivering humiliating defeats to the parties of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, and Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer. The mainstream parties kept control of the 720-member European Parliament. 27-member bloc swung to the right in a sign of the anti-establishment sentiment on the continent. These far-right are winners in many places, coming out on top in France, Italy and Austria. While Germany's AfD came second, it is still ahead of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's SPD party. And the hard right also did well in the Netherlands. In France, Marine Le Pen's national rally delivered a crushing defeat to Macron. The French president responded by swiftly dissolving France's national parliament and calling for snap elections.
After having proceeded with the consultations as provided in Article 12 of our Constitution, I decided to give back to you the choice for the future of our parliament with a vote. And so I am dissolving tonight a National Assembly.
Je dissous donc ce soir l'Assemblée nationale.
The French far-right leader, Marine Le Pen, welcomed President Emmanuel Macron's call for new parliamentary elections. After the president's camp heavily lost to the far-right party.
The
French have spoken, and this historic election shows that when the people vote, the people win. By giving more than 32% to the National Rally list, the French have just given us the highest score. All parties combined in 40 years. It is a real emotion to see this beautiful popular force rising up throughout the country.
A
4-day election has shaken the foundations of the European Union, with the far-right rocking ruling parties in France and Germany, the bloc's traditional driving forces. A big question is now being raised. What's behind the rise of far-right in Europe? Far-right parties, once considered extremists, are slowly making major gains. What are the factors that promoted voters to swing to the other side? So, how is the rise of the far-right changing Europe's mainstream political landscape? What the European Parliament election results mean for the war in Ukraine? And what's at stake for the rest of the world? We explore these and more. This June, millions of Europeans voted for candidates to serve 5-year terms in a new European Parliament, the legislative branch of the 27-member trade bloc. EU election projections show the far-right National Rally had scored more than double the votes of its centrist alliance in the French vote. Far-right gains in EU elections trigger a political earthquake in France, with President Emmanuel Macron calling for snap legislative polls in a high-risk move. Macron's announcement led to the gathering of several hundred people in Paris. People demonstrated against the far-right National Rally a day after Marine Le Pen's party defeated President Emmanuel Macron.
I think you can look around. There are a lot of young people. And in fact, young people have always been in favor of a left-wing union. Because today's crisis is so serious, so important on every level. Politically, with the extreme right on the brink of power. And as ecologists, we are worried about the ecological disaster and the collapse that's coming. The social collapse with very complicated situations for many French people. Today, it's time to unite and come together because we need to join the resistance and the fight against the extreme right. The brown plague is here. There's no time for procrastination.
C'est très triste. It's very sad to be able to persuade so many people on the basis of offensive ideas, on the basis of racism, homophobia, sexism, in short, lopsided ideas. It really hurts me. So we're trying to get moving, to mobilize, and it's great to see that so many people are out there.
We have to vote. We have to vote right now. We've got no choice. We've got to put up a front because we can't go on. France is going to die if we have the extreme right in power. It's not possible. Please vote, young people. Really, young people, please.
Macron's decision amounts to a roll of the dice on his political future, and that of France. It immediately sent the euro down, hitting French stocks and government bonds. Legislative elections are usually held in France every 5 years, weeks after a new president has been elected. The next ones should, therefore, have been held in mid-2027. Analysts say the French leader has taken the extremely risky gamble of dissolving the national parliament in a bid to keep the far-right National Rally out of power when his second term ends in 2027.
Et alors Macron peut espérer peut-être l'usure en disant voilà.
By saying that the National Rally is not prepared for government and it's going to be an experiment that turns sour. But is it really an experiment that will turn sour? In other countries today, the far right is in power and they govern. They make the governments work. They run administrations alone or in coalition. In coalition in Italy, for example, they participate in many other governments in the countries of the European Union. So, it's a gamble, but a precarious one.
C'est un pari, mais un pari extrêmement risqué.
Remember, a defeat in the upcoming legislative election will not overthrow Macron from office. Macron's ruling Renaissance Party has 169 lawmakers in the National Assembly, the biggest grouping in the 577-seat chamber. Le Pen's National Rally Party is the largest in opposition, with 88 seats. If his party loses, he will need to appoint a new prime minister from the opposition, including possibly from the National Rally. And the new PM would be responsible for selecting cabinet ministers, leading to a situation known as cohabitation.
It's a play at risks because he opens the possibility that the extreme right arrives for the first time at the government, and it opens the eventuality to have a cohabitation in France between him, the President of Republic, and the government. If le Rassemblement National wins these elections and arrive at the first place, even with a relative majority, even if it's not the absolute majority, it will be the obligation for Emmanuel Macron to choose a prime minister among the Rassemblement National and maybe among the coalition of the radical rights.
Parliamentary elections are conducted over 2 rounds in France. French will go to the polls to vote on the 30th of June, with a second round on the 7th of July. The early election will also come shortly before the July 26 start of the Paris Olympics, when all eyes will be on France. According to the International Olympic Committee, the political upheaval in France won't affect preparations for the sporting spectacle. Macron is banking on voters proving more motivated when it's their national parliament at stake. In his speech, he said he trusted the French public to show up massively for the snap polls, as well as to choose wisely. But it's far from guaranteed a win. In Germany, the far-right Alternative for Germany, or Alternative für Deutschland, or AfD, took the second place, underscoring the party's strength ahead of next year's federal election. The Conservative Alliance of the Christian Democratic Union and the Christian Social Union, which are in opposition at the federal level, topped the poll with about 30% of the vote. Germany's Greens were the biggest losers, falling by 8.5 percentage points to 12%, punished by voters for the cost of policies to reduce CO2 emissions, in line with expectations for environmental parties across Europe. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats suffered their worst result in a national vote in more than a century, renewing questions over the government's stability. SPD party came in third place behind the far-right AfD, which secured 15.9% of the vote. The Greens saw a significant loss, dropping 9 seats compared to the previous election in 2019, with 11.9% of the vote. Formed in 1980, the Greens built their base by taking a relatively hard line on environmental issues and climate change. In Scholz's government, which also includes the pro-business Free Democrats, the Green presence has been weightier. The party's stumble raises questions about whether the German economy, Europe's biggest, can make progress toward its ambitious climate targets. General elections aren't due in Germany until 2025. However, the government has persistently disagreed on major issues such as the war in Ukraine, Germany's budget, and the green transition. Scholz, whose face was plastered on posters across Germany alongside the SPD's lead European candidate Katharina Barley, has seemingly confirmed his unpopularity in polls. According to a Statista survey, as of January 2024, only 28% of respondents in Germany thought Olaf Scholz was doing well as Chancellor. This was the lowest rating since he took up the position. His approval rate had earlier peaked in March 2022 at 73%.
The election result was bad for all three governing parties. No one should go back to business as usual. At the same time, however, it is also important that we do our work to ensure that our country becomes modern and moves forward, and incidentally, to prepare ourselves for the fact that support will continue to grow so that the results of this work can be put to the vote at the next general election.
While Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats scored their worst result ever, the far-right AfD shrugged off a string of scandals to take second place in the EU election. The AfD's lead candidate stepped back from campaigning in May after declaring that the SS, the Nazis' main paramilitary force, were not all criminals. Now AfD's strong showing comes as Germany's party landscape undergoes its biggest upheaval in decades, with new populist parties vying to take space vacated by the shrinking mainstream parties that dominated since reunification in 1990. Germany has 96 of the 720 seats in the new European Parliament, the biggest number for a single country.
For Germany, it's going to be very turbulent next months ahead. But the governing Social Democratic Party lost massively. Don't forget, please, that next year Germany will have a national elections in 2025. And that is something what definitely is going to be very much highlighted by international attention, because obviously, Germany, as one of the most powerful member states of the European Union, stability in Germany is very much connected to how stable the entire European Union is.
In Austria, the far-right Freedom Party gained nearly 26% of the vote, topping a nationwide ballot for the first time. The governing Conservative People's Party picked up over 24% of the vote, followed by the Social Democrats with about 23% and the Greens at nearly 11%. The Freedom Party pledged to carry the momentum from its first ever victory in a European election into a national vote for parliament later this year. Austria is a small, landlocked country in Central Europe with just 20 seats in the European Parliament.
National elections, which are upcoming in Austria later this year, will perhaps lead to the electoral success for FPÖ, for far-right party in Austria. This is expected. This was expected that this party will do well during the European elections, taking into account their general popularity in Austria, but also, in autumn we'll see perhaps a repetition of their success.
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni saw her position strengthened after her right-wing populist Brothers of Italy more than doubled its seats in parliament. The Brothers of Italy party secured 28.8% of votes in the European elections, enhancing Meloni's political dominance both on the home front and within the European Union. The EU ballot indicated that Meloni's ruling coalition, made up of parties that stretch from the center-right to the far-right of the political spectrum, saw its support climb to over 47% from just under 43% in 2022. Meloni's personalized campaign has positioned her as a formidable figure within the EU, where far-right parties have made substantial gains.
I want to say thank you. Thank you to the majority of Italians who have continued to choose Brothers of Italy and the centre-right. This is something that has not happened in the past. That is happening today. It is a satisfaction and also a great responsibility. We must be aware of that responsibility. It seems that the Italian system is, so to speak, again becoming a bipolar system. It's good news.
The European Parliament will now have more hard-right members than ever before, occupying close to a quarter of the 720 seats. Let's take a look at the major concerns of voters and why Europe witnessed the rise of the right. One of the top factors was immigration. The European Parliament has voted to overhaul its immigration policy, managing the arrival of migrants and asylum seekers. EU's dominant parties here, the anti-immigrant populist right-wing parties that made significant inroads in the EU Parliament election, seeking to reduce their appeal with stricter limits to those permitted to settle in Europe.
Europe has become too flexible, too conciliatory, and soon migrants will have more rights than US citizens. I do not like that at all.
In these elections, I expect to see much less inequality in Europe in all the areas. I also hope that there will be fewer illegal immigrants because this is contributing to a sharp decline in employment among the French population.
The youth in Europe still seems to be driven by the same worries of the past: cost of living concerns and affordable housing. There were an estimated 13.258 million people without jobs in the EU, of whom 11.087 million in the euro area were unemployed in March 2022.
Far-right ideas since Hitler's time have always gained in popularity when there are low living standards, financial hardship among the people. No social cohesion, and thus people look for somewhere to turn to, since classic systemic parties, liberals, neoliberals and social democrats fail to give efficient solutions to raise personal income.
Environmentalists fear the rise of right-wing populist parties across the European continent could pose a threat to climate and environmental policies.
The rise of the far-right parties and the extremes in general always happens when the democracy is not working, when the middle class is suffering, in general when the situation is like the one we live in nowadays.
The largest land war on the continent since World War II was the biggest foreign policy question for Europeans as they headed to EU polls. The gains of the far-right members in Europe imperil efforts to support Kyiv in its war with Russia. The biggest threat might come from France's far-right National Rally Party that won the most seats in France. The growing influence of Ukraine-skeptical lawmakers in countries from Germany to Austria mirrors the ongoing fight in the US, where far-right lawmakers have worked to block military aid to Kyiv.
The answer I just gave you, I mean, the aspects that can be common among these far-right parties are, one might be the green transitions. The other one can be, for sure, the war that is going on in Ukraine after the invasion of Russia, which is, of course, having some drawbacks on the European economy. The topic of the sanctions is another relevant topic that gathered together most of these far-right parties that are against the sanctions.
The rise of the right in Europe might mean increasing authoritarian and non-democratic trends throughout the world. The members will need to overcome differences if they want to maximize their power on EU policies that roil their constituents. French President Emmanuel Macron called for moderate politicians from the left and the right to regroup to defeat the far right in general elections. How that takes shape in the days ahead remains to be seen. But what's clear in the EU polls is that the political landscape across the continent is changing like never before.